Welcome to the Deer Hunter Podcast, a platform created to entertain, educate, and evolve the modern-day deer hunter. What's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's edition of the Deer Hunter Podcast. It is currently, I always have to look because I never know, Sunday the 8th of September, and deer season is here for a lot of people and will be here for more pretty quickly. We're just a couple weeks out from the opener. At this point, pretty much just my priorities are to shoot with my broadheads and make sure that my bow is sighted in with my broadheads. There's no questions asked in that regard. To try to get shooting in every day. Right now, that's not been the reality. Just been working a ton of hours and had some, other previous commitments. And I hope to be able to shoot more this week. But my bow is sighted in nicely. Looks like I settled in on the Day 6 Evo, the 100 grain, and the G5 Striker 100 grain. So a two-blade, the Day 6 Evo is a unvented titanium ferrule SV30 steel broadhead, a two-blade essentially with the best bleeder setup that I've ever seen on a two-blade broadhead, in my opinion. That broadhead's just pretty much perfect. Aside, the price point is really heavy, so there's a lot of other options that'll work. I don't want to say as good because that's not the truth, but they'll work plenty good enough to kill anything in North America. But man, if I was investing on like a bunch of money on going on a hunt, even if I was traveling out of state, right? That's just how I am with money and expenses. If I was paying money to travel out of state and I didn't kill something, I'd be pissed. I mean, I'm sure I'd enjoy it, but I would have a hard time not feeling like I spent a bunch of money and didn't get what I wanted out of it. So, that would definitely be something that I'd be investing in, is the best broadhead that you could potentially get. And for me personally, everybody's got their own preferences and own reasons why. And like I said, there's 10,000 broadheads on the market. Probably pretty close to 10,000 of them could kill whitetails with a good tuned modern compound bow. So it's all whatever flavor you're into in that regard. But I've been through dozens and dozens and dozens of broadheads over the course of the last, over 20 years of shooting archery and shooting broadheads. And I think this is my favorite one all time yet that I've come across. So that's a pretty bold statement. Like I said, the negative factor is you're talking about $30 per head. And so essentially $89 or something of that nature is going to get you 3 broadheads, which, there's return on investment as far as the quality goes. You probably maintain them and hold on to them for a long time. It's titanium ferrule with interchangeable blades. So you have an initial investment, but that doesn't protect you from losing them in an animal. I mean, I have days where I went through 3 broadheads, so that's why I went with the Striker as well. It's obviously a much lower price point. It's a vented broadhead, which in my opinion is a pretty that's a pretty big negative factor. I like unvented broadheads. They're so much quieter, like hardly even comparable, and I feel like that's a big deal. As well as with a vented broadhead, you just have room for meat and bone and things to lodge actually in that space in the blade and essentially create more resistance. Whereas with an unvented solid piece, there's nothing to catch or get into. It's just, like I said, those Day 6 Evos are about the smoothest. I mean, they're like the Lamborghini of broadheads. Like the profile is just perfect, streamline in my opinion. But they come with that like I said, that heavy price point to pay for all that. So the Striker from G5 is a broadhead that, going back probably 7 years or so, whenever they first put those broadheads out, I shot those, and I had made the statement that had been the most accurate fixed blade broadhead that I personally had ever shot, versus like Muzzies and Thunderheads, or random different cheaper broadheads back in the late 90s and early 2000s. Since then, I know tons of stuff has come to market, and I'm not, at this point, I kind of like what I like for whatever reason, you know what I mean? So the Strikers, I can pick those up at any store locally. I don't need to go online and order them, have to wait for shipping. I have two options, one of which I can readily source at basically any sporting goods store. Plus, to me, G5 Prime is a local company, and I love to keep my business as local as possible. So the biggest factor with that too is I can shoot both of those heads, and they're basically right with each other for me, within 40 yards of accuracy. So far, those two heads hit pretty much identically for me. So it's just awesome. I can have them both in my quiver, and like I said, that provides two different price points depending on what I got going on financially. I don't know how everybody else is handling their broadhead situation, but I do know it comes at an expense and it adds up. And unfortunately, if you don't have a ton of confidence, like you're not overly confident with your broadhead, it's a pretty major problem. And you obviously want to feel confident, so we spend quite a bit of money to get that, and that's where I've been at over the course of the years. I've spent a ton of money on broadheads, and that's what I'm set up with this year. This is all 100% completely random. I had no plans on talking about this. I just literally have a table full of arrows and broadheads in front of me and thought, yeah, this is this time. Like right now, it's time to be and get dialed in. So that's what I'm doing. I'm excited to hunt. I probably won't hunt until October 5th, I'm thinking. That's like the first weekend in October, and I got a CPR class Saturday morning. So I'm banking on my Saturday night to be my first night, and then I'll probably hunt Sunday night too. And I'd really like to get some deer meat in the freezer as fast as possible. So I will be an equal opportunist bow hunter here right off the get. So for this week's episode, I sat down, had conversation with someone that I very much respect in the deer hunting community, a guy I call a friend, John Eberhart. John is, I'm sure everybody that's listening to this knows John. If you don't know John, you should listen back to a lot of his previous podcasts. He's got a ton of super valuable deer hunting knowledge, and his delivery can sometimes be a little crude. He's a bit of a bulldog, but he's a no bullshit kind of guy. He calls it the way he sees it. If you don't see it the same way that he does, that's not even a blip on his radar. Like, he just does not care, man. He's a pretty upfront guy, and I respect that about him. He says some stuff that can be taken the wrong way. I know he kind of picks on the Midwest, and he always uses the phrase TV guys. Well, that can mean a lot of different things now. I mean, I could even say I've put out deer hunting content that was watched on a TV, so I'm a TV guy now. I mean, I know a lot of guys that listen to this all self-film and everything. So, he just kind of uses that to point out the obvious ones. And what frustrates him, I think, at the core is people getting bad information. To him, is unacceptable. And I'm glad that he stands up for that, to be honest with you. I know it's cost him some relationships, and he's never gotten super famous and had a deer hunting show because of that, but he's right there. I don't know, someone let me know if there's a guy that they think is, more highly decorated here in the state of Michigan for killing big, giant deer regularly, I mean, pretty consistently. And he does it where other people don't do it. The guy's a beast, man. Like, he puts the facts down, and he's a super hard worker. And I was excited to have this conversation, but I just thought I'd make the statement, like, he, you could apply his knowledge anywhere and kill the biggest deer. Like when he says here in Michigan, or, just trying to get his point across that Michigan is definitely the hardest place to hunt, in his opinion. He, I don't know. To me, if I lived like out in the Midwest, I could see how it would be a little irritable, because I know everybody has their set of circumstances, but he does a good job of pointing things out with facts and numbers and everything. So that's what I really respect and appreciate him too, is he's really got it when it comes together like that. But if you just took all what he says and you can just blow off some of that stuff, I mean, I think it applies anywhere you would go if you were going to try to kill the biggest deer, the smartest deer. His strategy's pretty much universal and pretty proven. So ton of value in his knowledge. I've seen direct results from applying things that he's taught me, and I was excited to have this conversation with him. So trying to gain everything I can right now and get refreshers and just get my head working right, so that that the learning curve, I don't have to revisit the learning curve as heavily throughout the season, trying to get ahead of it, because that always happens. It's a little bit of a process to get back in the swing of things. So I've been talking to these guys. Got another good one coming up next week, as John talks about on this podcast. He's involved with the Hunting Public Land Challenge, as is Dan Infalt. A couple high-profile guys right there. I actually talked to Dan yesterday, and him and myself are going to record a podcast, I think tomorrow, and that'll be next week's. So I've got a couple in the bank here. Might see 2 episodes this week, depending on what's going on. It's going to be a short week for us. We're heading to northern Michigan, Traverse City, on Thursday evening. Anybody that's in or around the Traverse City area and wants to come out and have a couple cold beers, we're going to be doing a live podcast at the Workshop Brewery. That's at 6 p.m. on Thursday this coming week. So Ryan, Drew, and I are heading up north for the weekend to do some scouting. We're going to head to Traverse City for the day, hang out there, meet a bunch of deer hunters at the workshop around, I don't know, we'll probably get there around 5, I'm thinking. Then we're going to do a little live podcast, a little hangout, probably have a few beers, eat some delicious brewery food, and then hang out and shoot the shit for the evening. So anybody that can make it out, that'd be awesome. I'm going to share tonight on our Facebook all the information for the event. So if you see it come across and you know anybody up in that area, send it to them. We'd love to get as many people out as possible. So that's where we'll be this Thursday. Love to see you guys come out. Enjoy this week's episode. Everybody get ready. Here it comes, a couple weeks away. We'll catch you next week. All right, well, good. Well, let's get rocking and rolling on it, John. I appreciate you taking the time to sit down and do this with me this evening. Have you, what do you got going on? I know what we talked last week, and you told me you're recovering from some bicep surgery, huh?
Yeah, in June 13th, I went in and had surgery. They did the typical rotator cuff, bones. They removed bone spurs and arthritis, and I had also during postseason when I was prepping trees, I ripped my bicep tendon off my left shoulder. So basically I went to get the surgery on the bicep, and they did the rotator cuff at the same time. So basically they drilled a 6-millimeter hole in my upper arm bone and stuck my bicep tendon in it, and it takes 3 months before they feel that is attached well enough to start rehab. So I don't start rehab on that until about another 2 weeks, and my left arm is like a limp noodle right now. It just hangs there.
So that's the reason I'm bringing it up. Obviously, we're getting into deer season. how are you working around that? What's your plan?
I have absolutely no clue.
Oh gosh.
I'm scheduled to do that. The hunting public, that
Yeah.
pressure for the public land challenge in southern Michigan, which I think is going to be very, very interesting, and I hope it's all on the up and up. Uh, and I was scheduled to be one of the hunters, but obviously I don't think that's going to happen because I don't think there's any way on God's green earth that I'll be able to shoot a bow by October 1. But I will still be there with Greg, supporting Greg and Ernie, because they're going to be the tethered team from the saddle team. And Dan Infalt's going to have a team. Mark Kenyon might have a team, him and Andy May. The hunting public will have a team. And a Jeff Sturgis, I believe,
Yes.
will have a team. So there will be at least 5 teams there. They're going to be 2-man teams. Even though they may have other people there from their team, only 2 of them get to hunt. Greg and Ernie are going to hunt from the tethered side, but I'll be there because there'll be a lot of talk around the campfire, during the day and in the evening. And the way the hunt's supposed to go, it's going to be based out of, I believe, Waterloo Recreation Area, starting October 1. And you're going to be any of the teams are going to be able to go to any public land within a 3-hour distance, and they have to come back each night, obviously.
Okay.
And it's supposed to be public land that you've never stepped foot on before, and it's also supposed to be, just a total 100% freelance. You are not supposed to have received any GPS coordinates from other hunters that may be buddies of yours. And I don't know how they're going to track that, but anyway, that's the way it's going to be. And the hunting public guys are putting it on, and they don't look at it as a contest. They look at it as more of a fun thing of sitting around and getting everybody's different takes on hunting strategies and stuff like that.
Man, that's great. I want to dive right into that because I've had a few people bring this up to me, and I really don't know any of the details of it. But what you just talked about, I can really respect and appreciate that all you high-level guys are getting together and going to put this content together and doing it all on public land. There is so much value in that. I think that is a great thing that you guys are all doing. But, boy, oh boy, it sounds like a boxing match to me. And like you just said, I don't know how they're going to track this stuff because, boy, with technology now, I mean, it's so easy for somebody that's been in there and hunted that place for years, and these guys all got connections. I mean, it would seem like people are going to be looking at Onyx pins and potentially doing boots on the ground stuff. I mean, some of these guys are local, some of these guys are not, but I think at the end of the day, when you get a group of deer hunters all together at a camp and a campfire, I think it's all going to work out excellent for everybody involved, but I can definitely see everybody trying to gain the competitive advantage because I imagine. So walk me through this. You said it's not a contest, but I mean, is there any kind of is there any value in who gets? Walk me through the whole thing, how you found out about it, how you got involved with it, because I actually know nothing about it.
Okay. Well, the hunting public is the one that brought it up. They brought it up to Tethered first. And then Tethered was interested in doing it, and Dan Infalt's name came up because he's got a big following. Then Jeff Sturgis's name came up. I think he's got a big YouTube following. Obviously, Mark Kenyon does, and Andy May, who's a good friend of Mark Kenyon's, and I think he does podcasts with him. Andy May is also a Tethered Pro Staff guy, and he's a really good hunter. And basically, Andy and I would believe, are the only 2 guys of everybody that's going to be there that's ever hunted public land in Michigan. So none of these.
Well,
I
Mark,
think Dan may have. I think Dan might have.
I know Dan has done a bit of hunting in the UP, but I don't believe he's done much in the lower. But obviously, Mark Kenyon's done a fair amount. Jeff Sturgis, I believe he's from the UP originally, and he's hunted a lot in the Thumb. So I know, he's a Michigan guy. I know he doesn't live in Michigan now.
I'm talking public land, though. This has got to be public. I don't know if they've
much
for public. I know Andy's hunted public. I've hunted 17 different parcels of public, but I'm not going to be hunting. But I can still scout for Greg and Ernie. And my issue with the whole thing, and I'm going to love it no matter what, but my issue is with technology, like you said, Kevin. There's some of these guys have got such a huge following nationally that, who's going to say that somebody's not scouting property for them, and, hey, this is the GPS coordinates on this public land where I know there's a 130-inch buck. Because you know as well as I do, just going in and freelancing cold turkey on public land in Zone 3 in Michigan, which is, in my opinion, the most difficult place in the country as far as hunting pressure, and kill something on opening, first week of bow season, that's a serious, serious challenge. So we'll see what happens. It'll be interesting to say the least, and I'm sure there will be a lot of good conversation that'll be caught on film for YouTube, and each hunter will have a cameraman. So I don't know if that cameraman will be, well, let me put it this way. I guess if it were me hunting, I would want a cameraman that I knew that I trusted had good scent control, and I'm assuming any of these hunters that are actually going to do the physical hunting are going to want a cameraman they trust. So I think they'll bring their own cameraman, but it'd be kind of cool if there was somebody
Referee
from the hunting public or a non-biased person that at least followed everybody to see where they went to make sure they were hunting on public land and it was all copacetti. Because no matter what they say, even though that supposedly is not a contest, it's going to end up being that way.
No doubt about it. I mean, like I said, anytime you got a group of people that are that passionate and devote this much time to something, they're in it to win it. Like, it's something along those lines. And yeah, I just know, I mean, my following is substantially smaller than almost all of those guys, I would think. And I can think of a handful of guys right off the bat right now. If you told me, hey, we want to involve you in this, as soon as they caught wind of it, I'd be getting text and waypoints and everything saying, dude, I've been hunting here for years, killed a bunch of big bucks here, we're rooting for you, this is where to go, So, but, hey, that's the day and age, and I guess that's some of the challenges, and like I said, it's probably going to be a boxing match, so.
And it's going to be interesting, because I think there's going to be a lot more of these going forward, not just through the hunting public, but through other YouTube things, because I've seen online in some other talk forums, Facebook talk forums, where they want to do some more of this stuff, and so I think it'll be a big deal going forward. So there's got to be some sort of a criteria to put everything with checks and balances. I don't know how they will do it, but there should be. It
is really cool. It's a great concept, and it's a new, fresh idea in the face of deer hunting. I'd always thought, and I know you agree, if you had taken most of the guys that film in the Midwest on open fields and shoot deer and had to relocate them to public land and drop them in a parcel in Michigan, they'd have no clue. But it's cool that there's guys now that are willing to accept that challenge and share that and say, hey, there's a lot more to deer hunting than just going out on a managed piece of farm and killing a farm-raised deer. It is the challenge. That's the fun part of it, and Michigan lends itself well to that.
Yes, it does. And there was a very high-profile TV team that was going to. They thought about participating, but they didn't. And yeah, I think a high-profile TV team would really struggle, because I mean, you look at, they all hunt food plots and field edges and open timber, and you get on public land in southern Michigan in Zone 3, it's all junk. It's all trash. We don't have public lands where they plant food plots and they plant crops. It's all stuff that's basically unmaintained. It's all trash and swamps and timber and mature timber for the most part. I mean, there's a few parcels, I guess, that have some crops, but for the most part, it's all junk.
Yeah.
Well, when I say junk, I mean nasty cover, swamps, cattail marshes, timber with heavy understudy, briars, red brush, autumn olive stuff, and it's just a lot of trash to hunt in, and in my opinion, for somebody to to kill something, a decent, even a 2 or 3 year old, they're going to have to be in the stuff. They're going to have to be back in the junk because deer, whitetails in Michigan with all the preseason scouting, they're pretty much the big ones. They're nocturnal before season opens. So
well, not only that, we'll be 2 weeks into squirrel. I mean, all the squirrel hunters and everybody else. I mean, those first 2 weeks, those deer, they get a switch flipped on them, and they say, "Oh, okay." Waterfowl guys are starting to hit the fields. I mean, it really changes quick, and those deer, they shift from summer feeding patterns to survival mode in about 2 days, I think.
yeah, that is so true, Kevin. Yep. As soon as there's human intrusions on the property, and there hasn't been since last turkey season, they know the mature bucks know the gig.
I have to ask you this, and would you contemplate? I mean, are you going to give up your bow season if that's the case, or would you contemplate using a crossbow because you are at a handicapped advantage here? You're not doing it because it's the easy ticket. You'd be doing it because you don't really have another option at this point, right?
Well, you got to keep in mind I can't lift anything with my left arm until for 2 weeks, so my left arm basically has no strength. So holding up a crossbow is actually more difficult than holding a vertical bow.
I gotcha.
And also, my big ip is going to be climbing trees,
right.
Pulling my weight up in a tree. So that's going to be a major, major issue. But did I? Yeah, I've been I've been asked that about 150 times already. Yeah, I really don't have any interest in hunting with a crossbow.
I kind of hear you with that. I mean, I might change my tune, and that's why I ask you. Obviously, a few years older than myself, and I don't know. I love deer hunting enough where I'd rather be out there than not be out there. But I do hear you at some point. Some of the things it's just like, yeah, I'm just not interested in that.
Yeah, I quit gun hunting in 1991 because it was just anticlimactic to me. I have nothing against it, and killing a deer with a crossbow doesn't interest me too much.
I get that. So this leads me right into exactly what I wanted to talk about, and that is hunting pressured deer, and you brought it up. I mean, you've traveled around the country and hunted quite a few different places, and Michigan, boy, it's a challenge. Those deer know real quick. They get heavily pressured, so that's kind of where I wanted to revolve this conversation around, is like identifying pressure and working around it. What do you think is going to be? I'm interested to hear your take on this. So some of these guys are coming, the hunting public guys. I'm going to assume it's possible that they're going to be stepping foot on Michigan public land for the first time.
I believe you're right.
I don't know if they have any clue what they're in store for, right?
I would assume that, yes. Hunting Kansas and Wisconsin and Illinois and Iowa and Nebraska public land is nowhere near what hunting Michigan public land is, for sure.
They're going to go on their maps, and they're going to say, this looks like a really good spot. And they're going to get there, and then when the sun comes up, they're going to see 6 tree stands. And they're going to go, all right, this is different, because I've been to scouting clinics in other states, whatnot, and people show me these are good places, and I'm thinking in my head, man, there'd be a 2-person lock-on ladder stand, tree stand, cabled to the tree here that somebody would be posted up in. You really, really have to hunt differently here and be creative, and not just here. The whole East Coast, I think, deals with similar problems in comparison to the Midwest, right?
Yeah, any state that has a very high general population for its land mass is going to have extremely heavy hunting pressure, and obviously Michigan, even though it's a relatively large state land mass-wise, probably 60% of all the hunting, I wouldn't say 60, 50% of all the hunting pressure is in Zone 3.
Right.
So, yeah, it's going to be different. There's no question it's going to be different than anything any of these people have ever seen in the past. But let's not make the assumption that they won't be able to figure it out, because I hope they will. I hope they will, and I hope somebody is successful. So
Well,
that would be.
I don't know the hunting public guys at all. Um, I really don't. But those other guys, they are they are savvy and smart deer hunters, and they'll get on deer. I'm just wondering what the kind of the kill criteria is going to be, because you kind of have to be aware of your area and what you have to manage your expectations, right? If you're going on a one weekend hunt to public land on Michigan.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It could be very possible for a 2.5-year-old 80-inch, 14-inch wide 8-point to win this.
Sure.
It's possible that there won't be a 2.5-year-old buckshot. I have absolutely no clue, and it's going to depend a lot on, in my opinion, what kind of leads some of these people may possibly get, and how that's going to be tracked and trying to nipped in the bud. So
3 hours from essentially the Lou is in Jackson County, is it?
yes,
Yeah. So 3 hours from there, I'm just trying to think. Can you get to the Thumb?
oh yeah,
Yeah.
oh yeah, yep.
Okay. So yeah, that's 3 hours from there. That's a pretty big, sizable chunk of place to go. Yeah, I can't imagine people aren't going to be taking tips and pointers, because I mean that right there is going to be would be your that would be your biggest asset. Well, you would agree with that, right? If you're traveling on an out-of-state trip, I mean that's where you start, right?
Yep, absolutely. And I think from Clare, I think the limit would be, if you drew a line from Clare across east and west, that'd be about the limit of where you could go.
Mm-hmm.
It's a 3-hour time frame. And yeah, I've hunted out of state a lot, but typically when I go out of state, it's during the rut phases, which has a totally different agenda to the whole thing. During the rut phases, mature bucks' testosterones rise, and they're moving during daylight hours more. So that's totally different than early season when preseason scouting and squirrel hunting. Any kind of pressure turns most mature bucks that have survived through one season in Michigan. It turns them pretty much nocturnal. During the early part of the season. At least that's what I've typically seen on public lands in Michigan in Zone 3.
This is cool. I didn't know anything. You and I didn't really talk about what we were going to talk about before this at all. I wasn't even thinking about this, but this conversation is really getting me excited for deer season in general, and the thought of all the intricacies of this operation, and that trip, and that is going to be a really cool thing. And I got to imagine that a lot of people are, obviously, I've had it brought up to me multiple times. I've just been so busy with my own stuff that I haven't had a chance to look outside of my own little box. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of people paying attention to this.
Oh yeah, on Facebook, I just started doing Facebook maybe a year and a half ago, and I don't really like it that much because it consumes so much of my time. But it's a big deal on Facebook on lots of different sites. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Greg and Ernie, who own Tethered, which is the company that has the Mantis, which is what I'm kind of endorsing and using this year. They brought it up to me, and they're the ones that invited me, and yeah. So it's kind of cool, and I'm really looking forward to it, even though I won't be one of the hunters.
Okay, well, let's just do this. I mean, like I said, I wanted to revolve the conversation in and around hunting pressured deer. So I'm going to back us up out of this just for a second, and I want to talk about some facts and numbers, and then we'll kind of get right back into this as far as like an outlook as to what your approach would be if you were one of the hunters, I guess, and if you're going to be freelancing on some the highest pressured public whitetail land and killing a big deer. But what's what is the data throughout our state right now? Have hunting licenses been rising or falling, specifically gun or bow? I know you pay close attention to all the numbers, and like, how is the state doing with deer harvest? Is Do you have like some updated numbers from last year and this year?
Yeah, I do. I just received the CBM record book about a week ago, and as far as hunting license sales, this was not in the CBM record book, but as far as hunting license sales go, Michigan last year sold around 320,000 bow hunting licenses. Gun hunting numbers are going down, but I think that's primarily because a lot of gun hunters have converted to using crossbows and they've filled their tags before gun season opens.
Mm-hmm.
Gun numbers are going down. Bow numbers are going up in Michigan due to crossbows. And in the CBM book, I kind of totaled up all the P and Y book bucks that were shot in 2018, and there was only like 50, I think 53 or 57 Pope and Young bucks entered into the CBM book from 2018. So when you're looking at 320,000 bow hunters, and there's only 53 P&Y bucks entered, that's a pretty bad ratio of P&Y entries per licensed hunters. Now, obviously, a lot of those bow hunting licenses were sold to crossbow hunters, and crossbow hunters can't enter a buck into the Pope and Young book or into the Michigan record book under the bow category. So that has something to do with it.
That's pretty
well.
cool that they, you know, I do like to see a little bit of separation. I'm fine with people getting out there and by any means buy a deer license, go deer hunting, make your life better than it would be if you weren't going deer hunting. I'm cool with that. I don't think you're affected me too much.
Mm-hmm.
But it is cool that the record books are honoring, you know, I guess the what we would deem archery.
Well, and the Michigan record book has a crossbow category. So.
Okay. So it's separated in that regard. But P
Yeah,
and Y is not, huh?
correct. Well, they have a archery and a crossbow category.
Oh, okay.
So I was just looking at the archery category of the bucks that scored 125 inches or greater.
I gotcha. And there is the fact that a lot of people don't enter those too, right? That's just going off the numbers of people that actually go to the effort too. And I know in Michigan it seems we're from a lot of people that I know, really piss poor at and the state doesn't do the best job either of getting the data, right?
Well, yeah, that's true. I think there's a high percentage of bow hunters from every state that don't physically enter their bucks in the P&Y record book if they kill one. But I would certainly assume that those averages are pretty similar from state to state.
I would get that.
And Michigan has more bow hunters. That we sell more bow hunting licenses than any other state. Wisconsin, for instance, they sell about 260,000 bow hunting licenses a year, and they always enter over 500 Pope and Young bucks a year.
Yeah.
So with 60,000 fewer license sales, they enter 10 times more P&Y bucks than Michigan does.
Right.
And you know, a state like Kansas, for instance, you know, they have about 45,000 bow hunter licenses sold, and they entered 190. Well, the year I'm looking at right here, they entered 190 P&Y bucks with only 45,000 licenses sold. So basically, that's one out of every 240 bow hunters actually entered a Pope and Young buck, whereas Michigan was one in every 4,305. So their odds of that killing a Pope and Young buck are 20 times greater per hunter than in Michigan.
I realized that when I started traveling out of the state and going, like, I spent some time in Wisconsin, and you'd go by pretty much everybody's pole barn, and if the door was open, they'd have a wall full of giant bucks, and I started to think, oh, okay, now I'm starting to get it. Like, it's just a different set of circumstances here for sure. It's not apples to apples by any means, right? And I've paid close attention to what you've done, and you know, I'm sure you've caught wind of it, caught backlash in the past of guys saying, "Oh, is Eberhart really believe in scent lock, or is he just endorsing that, or this and that?" And my statement has always been, there's no way that he's not doing it in that manner, because he's look at the results, and it's hard for people to understand them if they haven't spent time and hunted in the areas that you hunt. But what you've done is very remarkable.
Yeah, and there's two things that I attribute my success over the years to, and number one would be scent lock, activated carbon line clothing, as far as a scent control regiment, and number two would be hunting out of the saddle. And I can make some statements that there isn't another bow hunter in the country that can make. I've got 31 bucks listed in the Michigan record book, and that's from 19 different properties in 10 different counties. And I've hunted 17 different public land parcels in Michigan, and I've been on 23 out-of-state hunts, and on those 23 out-of-state hunts, I've taken 19 Pope and Young bucks from 13 properties in 5 different states. So while there may be thousands of hunters that have several bucks in the record book, including every TV personality, because they hunt like in zoo settings, what separates my accomplishment of having an accumulative total of 50 record book bucks from, in my opinion, any other bow hunter in the country is that I've exclusively taken all my deer off public land, knock-on doors for free permission properties or free walk-ons. I've never owned, leased, hunted, managed property, hunted on a relative's property, or paid a dime to hunt anywhere. And I don't believe any other hunter can make that claim.
I will I will agree with everything you just said, and I will add to it that I think a big product of, I don't think any of it works without your work ethic. Just knowing you personally and seeing how committed and how hard you work, like that is really what really ties it all in together. I mean, you go as far in the fall as to change your diet, right? To, like, you told me you don't eat onions or drink coffee. Like, you're literally changing the way you operate as a person throughout the deer season to become like the ultimate predator.
Yeah, I think most of your really successful hunters, you look at, I met a guy at an in-store in Clio at Hicks Outdoors a couple weeks ago, and he was, he's a 6-foot tall guy who was buff as hell, physically fit. I talked to him for probably half an hour. He's mentally there. Andy May is another guy like that. I personally feel when you're hunting heavily pressured properties, you have to be physically and mentally able to deal with all the issues that public land and heavily hunted properties offers. I work out every day from January through the beginning of September. Not this year because of my arm, but for the last 40 years, I work out every single day. And, to stay in physical fit, to be physical fit for climbing trees and walking 2 miles and wearing waders through a cattail marsh. And I mentally know when and where to do things. I know the proper seasonal timing and daily timing for each specific location I hunt. And I can tell just by the sign and how the entry routes work and the exit routes work. If, that can dictate whether it's a morning or an evening spot. So knowing what to do, being mentally able and being physically capable, I think is a huge issue. And I also watch my diet probably starting around mid-September, so that I don't eat onions and I don't eat garlic. I never drink coffee on a morning I'm going to hunt because it makes me want to go to the bathroom. You just look at it from a different perspective, because I feel the guys that are very, very successful are very competitive, and they just take it to another level.
Yep, I agree with all that, but it's just different when you've grown up hunting here and that's like your normal, versus to if you've grown up somewhere else and that's your normal, or you travel around and hunt and you're gonna come here. What would be your approach if you were coming from out of state? I guess it's hard to even phrase this, but what's going to be the biggest challenge, and what are you thinking in your head? Like you said, you're going to scout. You're going to help your team scout. So what's going to be the starting point?
Well, I can't go any place I've ever hunted before, so that's going to be difficult for me. So I'm going to start looking at some aerial photos, which is perfectly fine. We can look at aerial photos and look at stuff. And so basically, I'm going to be looking for marshes, cattail marshes, lakes that I might have to cross with my Radisson canoe. Get Ernie or Greg across it with my canoe. Places where it's difficult for most other hunters to go to, because to me, when I'm hunting heavily hunted public land, I try to pretend everybody's trying to kill me. So if everybody's trying to kill me, I'm looking for the areas where I may feel safe and comfortable getting up and moving during daylight hours. Because that's exactly the same mindset that a mature buck that's been through a couple of deer seasons in Michigan thinks. Preseason scouting pressure and early season hunting is going to push those deer back into these very remote areas that they may possibly get up and move during daylight hours. And a lot of them, if there's not any of those types of remote areas on the public land, they will just stay hunkered down until after daylight before they move. So I'm going to be looking for those areas way back in, and that's going to be interesting because I think all these other guys coming into Michigan, they may come in with a little bit different mindset because they've hunted in you hunt in Kansas or Iowa public land, it's better than almost any private parcel, even in managed parcels in Michigan.
Right.
They just don't get hunted, and basically all of the perimeter resident hunters, if they start bow hunting, they push some of the bigger deer typically into the public land parcels in those states, because typically it's the public land parcels that have the cover. It has the heavy security cover, so that's where they push them into, whereas most of the private land parcels, they have small woodlots and fence rows and maybe some CRP fields, but they're primarily crops. So, most of the guys on public land out west, they're hunting a different type of public land and a different type of pressure. But hopefully they come in and they learn fast, and I honestly hope a couple guys kill some nice, decent bucks. That would be awesome.
I agree with that, and I agree with what you said too. I noticed that when I travel out of state, a lot of the state land is stuff that wasn't able to be developed via wetland, and it'd be surrounded by ag. I mean, miles of ag, and then you look and it's like, well, of course this is where the deer are going to want to be. I mean, everything else is bean and corns and fence rows, and then you got a big section of swamp and marsh. I mean, it's just this couldn't be better for a public land hunter or a hunter in general. This is where I would, where the deer are going to choose to be.
Yeah, and there's no pressure on the public land. The public lands I've hunted in Kansas and Iowa, I don't ever remember seeing another bow hunter. That would never, ever happen here. There's no way.
No. If you go out on public land here, you're probably going to make a new friend.
Hey, I didn't even see cars in the parking lot.
Right.
Let alone somebody in the field.
Yeah.
It's just different.
It is different. And in northern Michigan, it's different. Obviously, like when you get up into the big woods in northern Michigan during bow season, it's vast and it's pretty empty for the most part. You get all the gun hunters that travel up there for the traditional deer camp. But if you go bow hunting on public land in northern Michigan, like I guess I'm talking, if you go north of like Grayling or to the up to the UP, it's a different set of circumstances. But when you're talking southern Michigan, boy, it just from October 1. Well, I mean, we have a youth season is that this weekend?
I honestly don't know. I thought it was the last weekend in September.
Okay, well, I know that there's a veteran hunt and a youth weekend hunt. The deer are gonna, our deer season essentially starts here in the next week or two, and then it's just full bore for them, and yeah, they just adjust and adapt. And any deer that have been through, any bucks that have been through one or two seasons, they learn so quickly, right? And they're just a completely different animal.
Yeah, absolutely. They either learn real quick or they die.
Right.
It's one or the other, and the guys out west, they just don't have to deal with that. I am so glad that I was raised in bow hunted in Michigan because, in my opinion, you take a bow hunter that's relatively successful in Michigan or a PA or a New York or a Massachusetts or a West Virginia or Virginia, those states up the East Coast where they have big general populations. You take a guy that's relatively successful at killing 2.5-year-old bucks annually, he can go out west and have no problem killing big bucks. He could hunt with any TV guy and probably outperform them on their own property. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility whatsoever. Look at these TV guys. As soon as their wives and kids start hunting, they kill 150-inch deer.
Right.
Obviously, they're not experts, so obviously the TV people aren't experts either. They're just hunting in zoo-type settings. And unfortunately, in Michigan, you have to actually learn how to hunt, unless you own a big piece of private managed property.
What's the dates again that this thing's taking place? I didn't hear what you said.
First week of season.
Oh, okay. So, okay.
I think the plan is we're all supposed to meet there sometime in the morning on October 1, and beyond that, I have no clue what's going to happen.
So what's your thought? Food source, like targeting the best food source, like an apple tree or something, because you're not relying on any type of rut activity at that point.
My thoughts are going to be, well, obviously anything early season is going to revolve around food. So my thoughts are going to be crossing a lake, possibly taking waders across a river, and typically once you access areas where most other hunters are not going to go, then you look for your typical things, Maybe there's some a lost apple tree here, but you're primarily going to be looking for white oaks and red oaks, or possibly beech trees if there's no oaks, which is in Michigan extremely rare. There's almost always oaks someplace, and this year the red oaks are just loaded. The whites up here where I'm at don't have any. Last year they did. This year the reds do, though. They're loaded. So it's going to be looking for acorns, oak trees, and some form of mast once you get back across into areas where other hunters are not going to go because they didn't bring a boat or a canoe or waders. And then hope you get some daytime activity. It's also going to be potentially hunting in a cattail marsh with a ground blind, with a pop-up ground blind, or along the edge of a cattail marsh or just a swamp marsh, where it butts up to some mature timber with some heavy understudy where deer can go from security cover to security cover up into a timber ridge or something where there's some acorns. It's all going to be, and everything is going to be security cover oriented, without a doubt.
Yeah, right.
If there's not going to be, I would never set up on a location on public land in Michigan at any time of the year if there wasn't some form of perimeter security cover around the kill zone and some form of transition security cover to a known bedding area. In other words, if during the rut phases I'm hunting a transition zone between two bedding areas for some daytime traffic, if that, let's say there's a bedding area A and a bedding area B, and the only thing between that bedding area is, let's say, 300 yards of mature timber with no understudy, in other words, no ground cover, that would be a waste of my time because a mature buck in Michigan is not going to walk through that exposed, vulnerable, open timber to get to the other bedding area. But if there was some good transition security cover between the two bedding areas where a deer could go through the security cover or skirt the edge of the security cover so he has a quick exit route, then that's a spot I may set up for, a morning/midday hunt.
Let me ask you this. I've always struggled with identifying the different types of acorn. I mean, you just said reds and whites. Acorns are a big deal, and
Huge.
I mean, how much do you know about what the difference is between them as far as when they're on the ground and what deer actually prefer? There's a lot of different types of acorns,
Yeah, there's
right?
a lot of difference, and it's really easy to identify the two. They drop about the same time, so the timing, they're dropping right now. So they're falling right now. They're all over my driveway because I got a big red oak over my driveway. But a red oak tree, this is really important for people that are listening. You may want to write this down. A red oak tree has smooth bark all the way up the tree and out the branches. And a red oak tree has pointed lobes on the leaves. And a red oak tree has large quarter-sized acorns. That's a red oak. Mm-hmm. Now, red oak acorns are extremely bitter. If you bit into a red oak acorn, you would immediately spit it out because of the tannins in it are so bitter. Now, a white oak has rough bark all the way up the tree and all the way out every branch. And a white oak has rounded lobes on the leaves. And a white oak acorn is relatively small. It's probably about the size of a dime or a pin oak. Pin oak is a form of a white oak also. Bur oak is also a form of a white oak, which is a bur oak has that big fuzzy burr on the top of the acorn, and they're small acorns as well. Now, a white oak acorn, if you break that open, it tastes kind of somewhat like a macadamia nut. It's kind of mild. You know, you could actually sit down and eat a bowl of white oak acorns. And what I would suggest people do is when you're walking through the woods and you see a red oak tree with those big acorns, pick one up, put it in your pocket, and when you go and you see a white oak acorn, pick it up and put it in your pocket and open them up and eat them. Make sure you eat the white one first before you try the red, because you'll spit the red out. And whitetails will always gravitate to the white oak trees first if they're dropping acorns over reds. Okay. Now, if there's a red oak that's surrounded in perimeter security cover close to a bedding area or on a ridge with a lot of heavy security understudy, whereas the white oaks are out in the open where there is no understudy and they're more in open areas, then they might eat a red oak acorn until dark and then move over to the whites, because they still don't want to be vulnerable, eating under the white oaks out in the exposed area. They'll eat the red oaks and then move out into the whites after dark.
So essentially, if it's apples to apples and both trees are in cover, the deer are going to prefer the white.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I'm assuming the white disappears earlier because the deer are eating them through the night and they're targeting them, and then the reds would be more available potentially a little later because they're not. It sounds like they wouldn't be the first priority.
Yeah, and turkeys eat them too. So,
right.
Yep. Yeah, without a doubt, the whites go away first, and they're also smaller. So a lot of times when you're walking up like through Manistee National Forest or some of these northern timber areas, which are primarily red oaks, in the winter after a good acorn mass, there's acorns all over. It's like walking on marbles.
Right. Is that the two primary? I mean, you said there's a bur oak, but that's a phase of a white oak.
Correct. Yep. Bur oaks, pin oaks. Yeah, they're still going to have the rounded lobes on the leaves and the rough bark all the way up. They're just a different type of white oak. They're in the white oak family.
And what dictates? Is there anything? What dictates? I know some years some trees have acorns and some years they don't. Like you just mentioned, the acorn crop's can be good. The acorn crop's not going to be good. Is there a knowledge that understands? I'm assuming.
No, it's pretty much weather related. Reds typically have them every other year. Whites can have them every year, but they typically don't. I've seen years where whites have went 2 years before between mast. In other words, they'd have mast and two years without them, and then they have them on the fourth year. So 1 year they have it, the next two they don't, then the fourth one they do. Reds tend to be a little more consistent. They seem like they're every other year. And there's a lot more red oaks out in the woods typically than there are whites as well.
Now, would that be all? So would that dictate all the trees? So if you have a group of trees in an area, you're not saying that maybe if there's 10 red oaks on a piece of property, you're not saying 1 year 4 might and 6 might not. They all in unison do or don't have acorns?
Typically, yeah, when the reds produce, all the reds in an area typically produce. There may be a couple that don't,
okay,
but typically they all do. And the same with the whites. Last year, all the whites I looked at were loaded. This year, I haven't seen a white oak with any acorns in it this year,
Really?
and all the reds are loaded.
All right. Yeah, I did a lot of
Some years they
scouting.
both have.
Right. Yeah, I did a lot of scouting last year up in the big woods in northern Michigan and found some good acorn crops, and the deer were I mean it was happening there. I mean, seeing bucks during daylight, they were gravitating to that food source heavily. I took note of that, and I got to I'm going up there, and not this coming weekend. This coming weekend is the Woods and Water Expo, but the following weekend I'm going on my speed tour and gonna revisit and see if those trees have oaks. That's the only way to do it, right? You got to get in there.
Yep, that's the only way to tell. I do all my scouting and location preparation during postseason, and when I'm preparing a location at an apple tree or a white oak or a red oak, a lot of times I'll prepare the location. I have no idea what they're going to have in the fall. I have no clue. So I typically do what I call a speed tour, and I actually, kind of invented that term, if you will. I do a speed tour after September 20th of all of my potential early season locations. So this year I probably got roughly 40 trees prepped. I think I prepped 6 new ones during postseason this last spring. But I've got roughly around 40. Probably 22 of those are what I consider potential early season locations. So they are at apple trees, white oaks, red oaks, or they're at what was a primary scrape area on the edge of a crop field. So the years the crops are in standing corn, those scrape areas will be worth hunting. Now, if I do my speed tour and where I had set up on a primary scrape area on the edge of a crop field in the spring, and I do a speed tour, even if the scrapes are active, if that field is in a short crop like beans or hay or, cut winter wheat, I won't hunt it because a mature buck in Michigan's typically not going to come out and work a scrape where he's exposed to an open field to the side. So if that crop field is in standing corn where he's got security cover to security cover, yeah, there's an excellent chance he'd come out and work that in the daylight. But what I'm doing with the speed tours, I'm checking all of my potential early season locations to see if they have mast or fruit, see if the apple trees are dropping apples, see if the white oaks or red oaks have acorns and are dropping. And then I also, if they are dropping, I also search around them a little bit, because if I prepped it, it's got some form of security cover around its perimeter and has transition security cover to a known bedding area. Otherwise, I wouldn't have prepped it. There should also, because I'm doing it 3 weeks after the mature bucks have rubbed out, there should also be some form of buck rubs or, potentially even a scrape at an apple tree or something like that. So I'm not only looking to make sure there's master fruit, I'm also looking to check for, buck sign posts that are fresh, and that will dictate, if I hunt those during the early season.
I heard another good a successful public land deer hunter that hunts some pressured states a phrase to me that he only hunts no mature whitetail in these pressured areas would spend daylight time in any area where they don't have something touching them in the form of foliage. So, cattails, some type of taller grass, underbrush. He basically made that statement to me. If they can't physically feel something touching their body, they are not comfortable there in daylight. And that was an eye opener for me as far as how I envision what is and what isn't acceptable for cover for them.
I agree with him. To a point. I don't believe it has to be touching them. I have always believed in security cover, security cover, security cover. If you're not hunting in or next to security cover in a heavily pressured area, you're almost wasting your time. All the sign in the world is irrelevant if it's made in the dark, by a mature buck. So
right.
I only hunt mature buck sign that I feel is visited during the daylight hours. And I somewhat agree, but I don't think it has to be physically touching him. I think a mature buck likes to be within 1 or 2 bounds of quick exit security cover, just like you just said. Cattail marsh, weed marsh, marsh, heavy understudy, red brush, autumn olive, just some sort of heavy security cover where if there's any danger whatsoever, 1 or 2 bounds and he's gone. He's totally gone out of sight and doesn't have to worry about getting shot.
Yeah, because
I totally agree with that.
Up until the rut phase, these deer during daylight hours, they're bedded before daylight, right? And they're typically they might shift their bed around during the day, but they're not doing any kind of walkabout or going anywhere during daylight hours until rut phase, right? They pretty much just hunker down from sun up to sundown, and then they go about their business. Or is that?
Yeah, that's somewhat correct. I do believe if a mature buck, and I have, this is all, what I personally believe. I don't have any scientific proof to back it up, but I do believe that if a mature buck moves into his bedding area well before daylight, which typically is what happens in Michigan, once he's in there and secure, he can hear if a hunter comes in because he's going to be in there, probably a half hour, 45 minutes before daylight. And he may move around and browse until daybreak, at which time he may bed down. But as long as he's secure and he doesn't hear anything coming in, I think there's an excellent chance he could get up and, browse a little bit during the middle of the day and bed back down. But he won't leave that bedding area until after dark for the most part.
Right.
Then during the rut, when testosterone levels rise and does start coming into estrus, it's always kind of interesting because you get a buck on a hot doe and who knows what the hell he's going to do.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. It's be similar to us living in a crime-ridden neighborhood and getting into our house before the sun goes down. We'll move around in our house because we knew nobody came in there, but not going to go out. You're not going to go out of the house on 4th of July night out in the streets of Detroit,
Yeah, and that's kind of a good point because when I'm postseason scouting, I had mentioned probably 22 of my 40 locations are where there's some sort of food source for early season hunting if they're producing. I hunt a lot of bedding areas as well, interiors of bedding areas. It's like if I wanted to kill you, my best bet would go hide out in your house, in your bedroom, or by the kitchen, by the refrigerator, because I know when you go home, you're going to go in the refrigerator, and I know you're going to go to your bedroom. I'm not going to hide in your basement. I'm not going to hide in the living room or the dining room or in some of the other peripheral rooms because you may get something to eat and not go in the dining room or living room, or but I know you're going to be in the kitchen or the bedroom at some point in time before you go to bed. So, people that hold their bedding areas and leave them as sanctuary areas and never go in them, I think is ridiculous. I think it's almost stupid because bedding areas, the interiors of bedding areas are where mature bucks typically do their breeding. It's where they push does that are in heat into. They like to breed within the security cover. They'll breed a doe for a period of time, 30, 40 seconds, and then, they'll lay there or whatever for 20 minutes, and doe will get up and he'll chase her for maybe 40, 50 yards in a bedding area, and they'll breed again, and they do that all day long. And people that sit on the perimeter of bedding areas and just listen to that, it's ridiculous. So when I do my postseason scouting, I always scout the interiors of any known bedding areas, and I'll prep some locations at the best sign where the most converging runways are within a bedding area, or let's say there's an oak tree or in a bedding area, I'll prep that. And then, I strategically leave those alone until the rut. I never hunt them during the early season. But during the rut, I'll go in an hour and a half to 2 hours before daylight, get in my tree, and I will sit all day, and then I will leave a half hour after dark. So I have a perfect scent regimen. I never worry about getting winded because when you're hunting in a bedding area, you're going to have deer downwind of you some point in time during the day. But I'm in there before the bucks come in, and I leave after everything is left. That's why I leave a half hour after daylight or after dark. So I'm strategically hunting it on all-day hunts during the rut phases only, and that's where all that buck activity is moving around during the rut phases when they're with does, or they're searching for does in the bedding areas. I think people that don't hunt interiors or bedding areas are making a big mistake, unless you got several hunters, and then if you are going to hunt in the bedding area, the rest of them are going to want to, because then you'll probably trash it out. Because you have to be a very strategic hunter. You have to have a perfect scent control regimen, and you have to commit to an all-day hunt to hunt interiors of bedding areas correctly. Otherwise, you're going to spook deer with your entries and exits. And if you get some sloppy hunter with a poor scent control, he's going to spook deer, and then you will possibly spook deer out of your bedding areas. And that's what people don't want to do. That's why a lot of people leave bedding areas, sanctuary areas, because they don't have a scent control regimen. They don't know how to strategically hunt within them, but they are phenomenal places to hunt.
Yeah, I would agree. You could be sitting right on the perimeter of one, and you're missing all the action. 75 yards can be the difference between seeing deer all day long and seeing no deer. I've found that out the hard way.
Sure. Anybody that's listening that's hunted ever walked around the perimeter of a bedding area, depending on its size, there may be 20 to 40 runways going into a bedding area. So if you're sitting on one or two of the doors, if you're in a tree where you can shoot to two of the doors into the bedding area, and there's 30 doors, you got a 1 in 15 chance of having a deer, if he comes out during daylight hours or goes in, after daybreak. You only got a 1 out of 15 odds of getting an opportunity. Whereas when you're in the interior of the bedding area, where those deer are going to move around all day during the rut phases, your odds are extremely high.
Yeah,
I'd say over 50%.
That has been a absolute huge game changer for me when you had first talked about, the being in there an hour early, and you're talking an hour before you would even. It's amazing to me. Deer don't wear watches, but that they know that in an hour the sun is going to start coming up. Obviously they have a different set of sensory that they can depend on to know time, but I'm just amazed that sometimes when I'm sitting out there in the pitch black, and you'd think, boy, if I didn't have a watch, I don't know if it's 2 a.m. or 4 a.m., but those deer do. Those deer certainly do, because 45 minutes, 30 minutes before it even begins to crack daylight, here they come.
Yep. You look at guys with feeders in Texas, or even guys that had feeders in Michigan. I don't hunt over bait, but I know a lot of guys that did, and I've talked to a lot of guys that'll be sitting in their tree stands, and they'll have does and fawns come out 5 minutes before the feeder's going off and wait. They know it's right. Okay. It's about time for the feeder to come off, so they walk out there and they're waiting for it to go off. Yeah, they have good times, and they're mature bucks are almost always within the bedding area half an hour before daylight. So an hour is not enough. You need to be in your tree and settled in an hour and a half before daylight and quiet. If you're going to spend the whole day there and you're committing a big time frame of a hunt, get up a half hour earlier. Don't be late. Don't spook one with your entry, because you'll be sorry. You will regret it. If you've done all this other stuff in preparation for it, and then I've hit the snooze alarm twice, and an hour before daylight's going to be okay, and then you spook something with your entry.
Yeah, I wonder if they have some type of biological clock or how that works, because just through running a handful of trail cameras, I'll have a trail camera a mile away that'll catch a deer at 3:45 in the morning, and then I'm hunting a mile away, and he comes into that bedding area an hour or 45 minutes before it even begins. It's like, how did he know when to leave that area, that he needed to cover this amount of ground to get back to here an hour before sunup, and they're right on the money. It's pretty amazing, but that has brought me a lot of success and a lot of lessons learned in the past 2 seasons, is that getting in there, an hour, and I actually enjoy that time. It's kind of calming and relaxing to you get in there and you kind of get your heart rate adjusted and settle down, and it is a relief when the sun does come up and you know that nothing, or potentially nothing knows that you're in that area. It's exciting.
That's interesting you say that, because I did a podcast with Mark Kenyon and the Tethered guys last week, and he said the exact same thing. He said, God, of all the books I've read of you, and one of the things that I really enjoy more than anything is getting in my tree way before daylight, and I can just relax and go to sleep that last hour before daylight. He said it's just so relaxing.
It is. It's nice. And like I said, you get in there, and what else? You could be laying in bed, or you could be sitting 20 foot up in a tree. I'd rather be 20 foot up in a tree that time of year with that anticipation and everything. And I feel like it's valuable that you learn a lot. I've seen through moonlight, and especially if there's water involved, you can see pretty good. I mean, you can make out antlers and racks and the body size of deer, and I've learned a lot about what time those deer come in from, which direction they're coming from, because that kind of tells me where they were spending time that night.
Yeah, you hear them come in, sure.
Yep, and same thing for staying in there after dark and letting everything leave. I feel like that hour before and that hour after light is real valuable for learning as a hunter.
Yeah, that's probably the getting there so early is something that I've had a lot of feedback on. Obviously, scentlock and saddles I've had more feedback on than anything else I've ever talked about, because it's made such a big difference to a lot of people. That getting there before daylight, I've had a lot of people send me emails, especially guys that were hunting at like oaks or apple trees in the morning, which I think is taboo. I don't think you should hunt food, mast, and fruit trees on morning hunts, because you typically spook deer with your entry. The guys that were hunting, especially at oaks in other states, they were going in a half hour before daylight, and they were always spooking deer at their location, that were already in there feeding on the acorns. And they read, one of my books, and it's like, get there really early. And so they got there, 2 hours before daylight, settled in an hour and a half before daylight, and they physically got to hear the deer come in and start munching acorns. And because the oaks were either in a bedding area, on the edge of a bedding area, or within some security cover, they felt comfortable eating there until daylight, because they could hear anything coming towards them, and they would spook and run into the bedding area. Mm-hmm. And then they would kill the bucks right at the crack of light, because they were still there gnawing on a few acorns.
Yep, that's added a ton of value to me, playing the pressure too, is identifying that. I know there's, at this parking lot, people are going to pull up in 15 minutes before light, walk in, and they're going to affect deer, and they're going to push them back to a spot where they don't feel people are. And if I can get to that spot and utilize those guys to my advantage, I've found a lot of value in that.
Yep. I totally agree. We do not have the exclusivity on the desire to survive, and mature deer do as well. And they react to human intrusions and move back into heavier cover. I don't know how many times I've been in trees when the foliage is down, way before daylight on public land, and all of a sudden you see all these lights coming in, especially back when I gun hunted. See all these, and especially headlamps. I can't believe people hunt with headlamps, because they're just so bright and they move all over the place. I use a little single AAA light that I cup over my hand. I just want enough light to see the ground and the next tack.
Yeah. That's what I do too. I'll use typically I'll use a real soft red light, because I guess the science says deer don't see well into the red spectrum whatsoever, and I would believe that, seeing as how many deer I've killed, and how many deer have been killed from guys wearing hunter orange, that they just don't see well into that light spectrum. It's a shade of white or gray to them, so I'll use a low, a dim red light. But moving off of the early season stuff, that kind of all changes. Are you is the food source still the primary thing when the rut phase comes around, or is it's just strictly revolve around doe bedding, or how is that played? If we're going to talk, what are we going to talk basically like Halloween through November, right?
All of the above. Food is obviously a big deal all season because food attracts does and does attract bucks. So, if there's an apple tree or you're in a grove of oaks where there's still a lot of acorns on the ground, if you're in an apple tree that's dropping apples into November, they're going to have doe traffic. And basically, if they're going to have doe traffic, they're going to have bucks bugging them. So some of my early season locations where I'm keying on food sources, I also, once I hunt them 2 or 3 times, during the first week of season, I leave them alone after that until the end of October. I don't even go anywhere near them because I don't want to alter the doe activity, because odds are the mature bucks are nocturnal. They're not going to come in and feed at those during that October lull period. So all I'm doing by hunting them is I'm altering the doe traffic away from them, which then during the rut, if the doe traffic is altered away from them or they're not coming in until after dark, obviously that's what the bucks are going to do. So during the rut phases, I still key on the food sources because that's where does are. And then I also gravitate to the interiors of bedding areas where I know bucks are going to be breeding does, or transition security cover between bedding areas. Because during pre-rut, which is like October 5th through maybe November 5th, that's when the does are just starting to come into estrus, and bucks, the mature bucks are starting to look for those early estrus does. And when they're doing that, they're basically checking in the bedding areas, perimeters of bedding areas, and then taking the best available security cover to the next bedding area within their core area. So if there's a good stretch of transition security cover between 2 bedding areas, that's a great place to actually sleep in, catch up on a little bit of sleep deprivation. If you've had a week off and you've hunted 4 straight days, that's a good area to sleep in and get in there at like 10 o'clock in the morning in that transition zone between the 2 bedding areas, because typically that's something that's going to be best hunted from 11 o'clock to 3 o'clock. So the bucks are going to get up after daylight from the bedding areas. They may get up at 10, 10:30, 11 o'clock. They'll check the bedding area that they're in, and then they'll take the best security cover to the next bedding area within their core area, and they'll quit doing that until they run out of places to go where they don't have security cover to move to the next one. And then they'll just bed till after dark and then get up and do whatever they want to do after dark.
Is it almost impossible to describe what these bedding areas kind of look like without actually physically standing in one and seeing one? Is it something you can look on a map and know where doe bedding is going to be and then pick those kind of transition areas like you're talking about?
I'm not a doe versus buck bedding area. Does and bucks bed in the same areas. Does typically don't like to buck or bed close to bucks, because bucks bother them, especially subordinate bucks. But does and bucks, without question, bed in the same bedding areas if they're large enough. So, people that say this is a buck bedding area or this is a / doe bedding area, that is absolutely not true. I've bumped many does and many bucks in the same bedding area that were not with each other. So
yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, they're limited on places that they can be. But the bedding areas specifically.
Mm-hmm. Well, bedding area is real easy to define. Basically, like I said an hour ago, pretend everybody's trying to kill you. Where are the places where you'd feel most comfortably being or possibly getting up and moving during daylight hours? So you're going to go back into the cover. It may be in a big area of red brush. It may be across a river and into some marsh grassy area. It may be in a dry cattail marsh. Maybe in a big area of autumn olive. Just an area where if there's a human intrusion, you will notice it. You'll hear it. If you're a mature buck, you're going to know something's coming and you can react to it. You know, a lot of times it cracks me up, people will go out into a weed field and see some beds where deer have been bedding, and they say, well, this is a bedding area. Well, you know, if it's a really tall weed field, yeah, it might be a daytime bedding area, but it's not a quote-unquote bedding area. That's just a place where, you know, a doe and some fawns or maybe a couple of bucks or whatever, you know, at nighttime they're laying in that weed chewing their cud. You know, they'll eat acorns, they'll eat some browse, they'll eat some corn, depending on what's in the area as far as preferred food, and then they'll go lay down for a couple hours and just chew their cuds, and they typically lay out in the open in weed fields or whatever. So just because you get a weed field and you see some beds in it doesn't mean that's a daytime bedding area.
Yeah, they typically like, during the day, they like something over their head, right? Like,
I don't know if I'd go that far, because I've a lot of deer bed in cattail marshes and just, you know, tall weed marshes where there's, you know, maybe patches of water and some little dry mounds and stuff to bed in. So you don't necessarily need something over their head. You know, like trees. That really doesn't have anything to do with it. You know, when you look on an aerial map, it's pretty easy to see where marshes are. Obviously, you can see where rivers are, and typically along most rivers, there's going to be some form of bedding area, because a river goes through low-lying ground. And low-lying ground is going to have more moisture in it. So the more moisture there's going to be in the ground, obviously the heavier the cover is going to be along that river. So, you know, river edges oftentimes have phenomenal bedding right along their edges. So that can be a bedding area as well. But bedding areas come in many, many forms.
okay. Well,
There's places where a deer can feel comfortable being during daylight hours where, and I'm speaking of mature bucks here, you know, does a lot of times they'll bed on peripheral stuff or out in open timber, but a mature buck's typically going to bed where he's comfortable that there's not going to be any human intrusions, or if there is, he can just move back farther into heavy cover and doesn't have to worry about anything.
as far as the rut phase go, I think we kind of hit right on that. What I was wanting to get at is a 3-year-old, we'll call a mature deer here in Michigan, 3-year-old, 3 or 4 or 5-year-old buck. You just have to hunt them differently during the rut. They operate differently during the rut. They're just not running around all over the place, right? I've seen. Have you? I don't know, and I'm interested to know if you ever witnessed that. I've actually done like a small tending grunt before, and had mature does come in, and it's almost as if they are in fact like seeking out, and I've heard some biologists talk about that. You know, mature doe will actually seek out, you know, the dominant breeder in the area, and there's so few mature deer here in Michigan that these deer don't have to be running all over to find. You really have to be right in their home turf, right?
Absolutely. There are so few mature bucks in Michigan, obviously on public lands, and a lot of, you know, there's very few mature bucks on a lot of the private lands, because in Michigan we have so many small fragmented parcels. So even in some private areas, there may be 20, 30 bow hunters in trees opening day, because everybody owns 10 acres here, 20 acres there, and there's a lot of property owners in the section. But what was the question again? Say that real quick. I kind of lost track.
Yeah, just saying basically that these deer don't have to, these mature deer, they don't have to compete for breeding rights like in other states where somebody's going to smash a set of horns together and 2 mature bucks are going to come running. These deer just don't have to compete like that. I've even seen does basically look like they're looking, you know, they're looking to find the mature deer in the area coming to them.
Yeah, mature does, but the matriarch does, without question, want to be bred by the dominant bucks. And the mature does, without question, within their core area, know where the dominant bucks work their scrapes, and they know primarily where the dominant bucks bed, and they will, without question, search those dominant bucks out given the opportunity. I've been at scrape areas on multiple occasions where I've had a couple of mature does come in and just loiter around the primary scrape area waiting, and they didn't have their fawns with them. That's a key thing. You know, if you see a couple does in early November, or a doe in early November, and she's kind of acting funny and her fawns aren't with her, yeah, she's probably close to or in estrus. And yeah, I've had what you mentioned happen on multiple occasions. Yes.
Yep, that was something that I never knew growing up or paid. You know, I just didn't wasn't. You're not told by the magazine articles that that's the way it works, but a different set of circumstances here, and yeah, I just I've heard about it and then saw it through confirmation with my own eyes about seeing mature does like seeking out mates, and if there's limited mature bucks, that's just something to really be conscious of. I think that's something that can tip the odds in your favor if you're paying attention to everything that's going on around you.
You got to keep in mind, most writers, especially for national magazines, hunt managed property. Almost all of them. I don't think I know any that don't. And they're usually out west hunters, Illinois, Iowa, Kansas. And out there, there's as many, it's really strange to say, but the times I've hunted in Kansas and Iowa, especially Kansas, I'd say there's as many 4.5, 5.5, and 6.5-year-old bucks as there are 4.5, 5.5, and 6.5-year-old does. So the rut is extremely competitive. So you rattle antlers, you do any tactics or gimmicks, deer fall for it much, much easier. In Michigan, you probably, for every 3.5-year-old buck, there's probably 40 other deer. In other words, I'm not saying 40 does, but 40 other deer that would be comprised of does, fawns, and subordinate 1.5-year-old bucks. There's probably 40 of those to every 3.5-year-old buck in a given area in Michigan. So that mature buck, it doesn't take him long to pick up the next estrus doe once he's bred one through her cycle. If he goes out and searches at night for another estrus doe because this one's finished with her cycle, the first doe he crosses that's an estrus, even if she's with a 1.5 or a 2.5-year-old buck, he just takes her away and pushes her into some security cover and breeds her for the day and through her cycle. So it doesn't take a mature buck long to pick up the next hot doe. That's one reason I really key on the pre-rut in Michigan, because the pre-rut, there's not a lot of does in estrus yet, and those mature bucks are actually having to go out and search for them. Once the actual rut takes place, the main rut, and there's lots of does coming into estrus at the same time, he doesn't have to do a lot of searching, so he doesn't have to move that much during daylight hours at all. That's why it's really hard to kill. It's a little bit more difficult to kill a mature buck after like the 7th of November because they're typically doed up, whereas pre-season or pre-rut, they're actually out searching and checking their scrape areas and their haunts. Now the key is hunting in the type of area where they're checking their haunts during daylight hours. That's the key.
So you really like that later part of October, huh?
Yeah, 25th, 28th of October through like the 5th to the 7th of November is my favorite time in Michigan. My preference out of state is post-rut because when I go out of state, their gun seasons don't open until December, so I can hunt during Thanksgiving, which is post-rut, and that's a phenomenal time to hunt. But you can't do that in Michigan because that's gun seasons there. And once gun season has taken place in Michigan, I mean, for the next month and a half, it's pretty hard to get on a mature buck no matter what you do.
Yeah. I will say I have noticed, though, those bigger deer, they just through the trail cameras that I use trail cameras differently now. I collect the data and use it the following year. I think that's the only way, unless you're running a cellular camera, that you can do it without actually negatively hurting yourself. And I've found that, from that November 15th, that these deer will relocate to these thick areas, and they will be on their feet during daylight. They'll find spots where people aren't, and they just won't leave those spots. But they're
Yep.
the ones that are still around. They're still around. They're still doing their thing. I feel like I've collected a couple years worth of data now that come that Thanksgiving period of time, and I guess that's a product of what you just said, right? Uh, Majority of the does have probably been bred. There's would be a little bit of competition still lingering,
Yep.
and I've had success finding those spots where nobody's polluted or intoxicated yet, and those deer are held up there, and there's a little bit of competition. I've been
Yep.
surprised
Yep.
at, like,
Yep.
wow, okay, this is happening
Post
here.
rut's post rut's exactly the same as the pre rut. Pre rut, the mature bucks are looking for the early estrus does. Post rut, the mature bucks are looking for what few does are coming into estrus that haven't been in estrus already. In other words, post rut the vast majority of the does have been bred now. So now they actually have to get up and start moving around and looking for those late estrus does. So they have to move again. They have to make themselves vulnerable a little bit, and their testosterone levels still being so high kind of mentally allows them to do that,
Right.
to take chances that they wouldn't typically take. And that's very obvious out west where there's lots of mature bucks. I leave on the 16th when I go out west every year because I don't gun hunt, and we set up stand our saddle locations on the 17th and 18th, start hunting usually on the 19th, and we typically will see a lot of 125s to 135s from the 19th through the 21st and 22nd on, because we usually stay through about the 27th or 28th. That's when we start seeing the bigger 150s and 60s, is after the 22nd, 23rd one. The majority of does are obviously been bred. They're actually coming out and physically looking for those late estrus does. But out there, it's a lot more competitive because there's a lot of mature bucks.
Yeah. Well, hey, I'll be sensitive to your time, and I know we're getting a little bit long and late here. Is there anything that you want to touch on before we kind of wrap this up? Anything that you feel is critical that we mention?
No, I wouldn't. Well, I wouldn't mind just mentioning my Whitetail Workshops that I put on in the spring. I kind of give a little bit of explanation of what they are. They're 2-day events. I have one in March and 2 in April, and they're on my website, which I'll give my website in a minute. And the first day is out in the woods. It's a full day in the woods. Visit 13, 14 pre-prepped locations of mine on a place where a guy lets me hunt up here in central Michigan. And I explain all the situations. Why is this a morning tree? Why is this an evening tree? Why is this an early season location? Why is this strictly a rut phase location? I get up in my trees with my saddle so people can see how big of an advantage saddle hunting is over any conventional type of hunting. I go over scent lock a little bit during the infield day, but then once the infield day is over, I also explain entry and exit routes, which is a monstrous deal that most people do wrong. I shouldn't say most, a lot of people do wrong. And then at the end of the infield day, which is on a Saturday, if people want to, I spend about 2 hours showing people how to hunt out of the saddle, and basically that's just set up 18 inches off the ground. I got a couple trees set up, and I've got all the different Manus saddles where people can sit in them and try them, and I show them how to hook it up properly and how to hook the steps up properly for your ring. So that's something, if they want to stay, they can, and I've never had anybody not. But if you wanted to leave and go to your respective hotel for the next day, you can. And then Sunday is at Jay's Sporting Goods up in Clare in the Outback room, which is the seminar room. And it's about a 6 hour all-day interactive seminar where I answer questions and just go through hunting procedures and plans and tactics and scent lock and just pretty much everything. I have all my books as far as my out-of-state stuff, my diaries, maps of all the locations I've hunted over the years, going back into the 70s, which is probably into the several hundred locations, and that's interactive. Again, I answer questions, And Jay's also gives everybody a 15% discount voucher for the week. And in the Outback room, they're all nice office chairs, soft office chairs that swivel. So it's a very comfortable day on the seminar day. But it's a Saturday, Sunday event.
What are those dates again when you're running those?
Oh, let's see. One is going to be March 21st and 22nd. And these are 2020, obviously. The next one's April 4th and 5th. And then the next one's April 25th and 26th. And I like doing them during postseason when the foliage is down, because that's when I do all my postseason scouting and location preparation. And it's just a lot easier to see everything and how it's laid out with the foliage down. Because that's one of the advantages of postseason scouting, is you're looking at the woods the way it's going to look during the rut phases. All the foliage is down, so you're looking at it the same as it's going to look during the rut phases, which is typically when most mature bucks are shot. And my website is Deer-John, so it's DEER, and then there's a little dash, JOHN.net. Real simple, deer-john.net, or you could just probably Google my name and it would pop up, I'm sure.
I will link those in the show notes as well, so anybody that's listening to this would be able to just scroll down through their show notes and click on that, and it'll take you directly to those sites. And I'm gonna make it a point. I'm gonna put those dates on the calendar right now and set reminders for myself that I'd like to attend one of those. The last couple of years, I just haven't. It's slipped my mind, or I haven't been able to, but they're just such a value in spending a day out in the field and actually seeing that. You've been doing these for a few years now. I imagine you've probably got some pretty good testimonials from guys that have been involved with these, right?
I do. One of my best testimonials was actually from a 16-year-old blonde girl from New York.
Really?
Because half the people are from out of state, and this guy came from New York, and he brought his daughter, and she was just a diehard deer hunter, man. She was into it. And they went home and then that fall, he was after this big 8-pointer, and this is up on public land in northern New York, and she ended up shooting that 8-pointer on an all-day sit in the rain at 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Really?
I was so geeked because I'm the one that told her, you need to sit all day, and then rain is a beautiful time to sit all, midday. And yeah, she had her dad. She knew it was going to rain the next day, and it was a weekend. And she said, "Dad, we need to go buy a range because I want to hunt tomorrow all day." And she shot that buck, and it was so cool.
That's awesome.
I mean, I've got hundreds of testimonials on my website from TV guys. I shouldn't say TV guys. Mike Avery, Greg Sesselman, who owns Scentlock, the editor of Pope and Young magazine, the editor of Deer and Deer Hunting. Tom Nelson, who does American Archer. I've got testimonials from all of those guys, plus tons and tons of guys that have read one of my 3 books or watched my DVDs. I've probably got over 1,000 testimonials, and half of them are on that site.
Your books and DVDs are on your website as well for purchase?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
And all my podcasts. There's probably 20 different podcasts on there you can choose to listen to.
Are you, I know you did a TV series. Was it last year you did something? Was it on the Deer and Deer Hunting?
Yeah, that was pretty poor, I thought. I think they were done very well, but they were edited quite heavily.
Sure. Just not enough time in that period of time to get the information out, right? Product of the way that's laid out.
Well, I think a lot of times magazines and certain types of venues, they edit your stuff if it doesn't fit their advertisers.
Sure. So. Yeah, that makes sense. So I was just curious if you had anything that you were working on this coming season.
No, not with that. There's a lot of stuff coming down the pipe for 2020 from Tethered, though.
Okay.
A lot of new, exciting stuff coming from Tethered next year.
Okay.
On the saddle side.
Cool. Well, great. Well, thanks again for your time, and I will link all that stuff on your and you know what? I've never watched your DVDs, to just be honest with you, and I'm going to get on there right now tonight and order those up because man, I'm kind of trying to consume everything I can right now and just get everything fresh in my head so that when that late part of October rolls around, I'm dialed in. I've got a couple big deer that I've glassed up in some bean fields here locally, and I finally feel after 22 years of deer hunting, I now have the self-control to not damage myself, if that makes sense.
Oh, it makes perfect sense to me because a lot of people do damage themselves by hunting incorrectly.
Yeah, and
Totally.
it doesn't hurt to have a young family and work 60 hours a week. That'll keep you out of the woods too. So
that's a very valid point.
yep. So a product of I feel like I'm gonna hopefully have a good deer season, and the self-control is a big part of it. So yeah, I'm excited, and I'm gonna order those and watch those because I haven't had an opportunity to see them yet. So thanks again, John, for all the content that you put out and spending the time. I'm gonna be really interested. So on the one last thing on that hunting public thing that you guys are doing. So is that something that they're going to be putting up content? Where can people follow along with that?
I would believe on the hunting public web or Facebook page,
Okay.
or website. I think they put YouTube shows every week.
Yep. I think that's their deal. I think they have a really popular YouTube channel, so that must be what they do. And I'm hoping and assuming that they're gonna be publishing that content, somewhat in real time that people can follow along with.
Oh, they will. They will definitely be doing that.
That's going to be great. Well, best of luck to you guys. I'm really excited to see all you guys get together, and I'm sure that's going to be a really cool and unique event. So thanks again, and we'll catch up soon.
Thanks for the opportunity, Kevin.
Okay, John. Have a nice evening.